Everyone in our neighborhood, including my mom, labeled the new foster kid a dangerous psychopath, until he saved me from my abusive ex, and I uncovered that his so-called violent past was really him rescuing abused kids from horrific situations. So I exposed the ugly secrets my neighbors had buried for years, and watched as their flawless reputations fell apart, one by one. I was 17 when Trevor emerged from that social worker's vehicle on what felt like the most frigid January morning I had ever experienced. There was something about the way he clutched that solitary refuse sack that made the entire vicinity pause in silence. By the following day, Mrs. Patterson, the local purveyor of gossip, began circulating messages that the new foster child had been through 3 residences due to aggression and had hospitalized another youngster. Simultaneously, my mother declared, "Keep your distance from that boy." The Hendersons, she claimed, only took him for the $800 stipend, and individuals like him never truly change. The next morning at school, an eerie stillness fell over the corridor as Trevor entered, and I observed Manny, our usually genial security officer, begin to shadow him as if he were a felon. As students flattened themselves against lockers to avoid contact with him in chemistry, when pairings were assigned, Trevor's group suddenly recalled they already had 4 members, leaving him to complete the experiment alone. Yet, he still achieved the highest grade in our section, which led me to ponder what sort of violent deviant excelled in advanced chemistry. Over the subsequent weeks, I witnessed Trevor's existence descend into a living torment as someone scrawled "psycho" across his locker with a permanent marker, and the custodian compelled him to scour it off, while some students merely recorded and chuckled. The coach, upon reviewing Trevor's file during basketball tryouts, declared they required team players, not agitators, despite Trevor having just effortlessly sunk 10 consecutive free throws. The cafeteria ordeal was relentless, with spilled milk accidentally splashing onto him or his belongings daily. And on Valentine's Day, when everyone received candygrams, someone slipped a note into his locker stating, "Psychopaths do not merit affection." But Trevor never retaliated. March brought a complete shift when I remained late for yearbook duties and walked unaccompanied to the parking area. Anton, my former boyfriend, cornered me against my vehicle, his grasp tightening on my wrist. Terror ascended my spine as Anton drew me nearer, asserting, "No one rejects him." That's when Trevor's voice interjected, commanding, "Let go." Trevor stood by a nearby automobile, phone elevated and recording, as Anton spun around, labeling him a foster oddity. But Trevor continued filming, stating Anton could release me or account for this video to Principal Hayes tomorrow. I observed Anton weighing his choices before he released me with a warning that this encounter was far from over. Trevor remained until I had safely driven away. When I informed my mother that Trevor had assisted me, she erupted, claiming he had menaced those boys and that she knew he was perilous, which made me realize how distorted everything had become. The following morning, Anton's parents, in their designer attire and PDA badges, occupied Hayes' office, alleging Trevor had been harassing their son for weeks. Trevor presented his video to the vice principal, who dismissed it, asserting it only depicted the interaction between Anton and me, and if anything, it substantiated their stalking accusation. They instructed Trevor to maintain a 50-foot distance from Anton or face suspension. By lunchtime, the narrative had morphed into Trevor threatening Anton with a blade. Then his foster guardians received calls implying they had taken on more than they could handle. 2 weeks later, someone disseminated a summary of Trevor's case file, displaying 3 removals for aggressive incidents with no accompanying context. Soon, all the parent Facebook groups were demanding the removal of the dangerous student. Someone spray-painted "foster freak" on the driveway, and teachers ceased calling on Trevor even when his hand was raised. I frantically searched social media for any former acquaintances of Trevor's who might be able to reveal the truth. I located one girl who stated Trevor had rescued her younger sibling and was consequently labeled violent. But before I could acquire more information, the account became private. One evening, I discovered him at the deserted basketball court, his shoulders trembling. I approached him and inquired if he had ever saved a child. His composure completely fractured. "You are the first person who has asked for my perspective," he stated. During his initial placement in a home, he fractured a foster father's nose for touching an 8-year-old girl. The charges were dropped when the girl recounted the truth, but the violent label persisted, following him to a second home where he intervened between a foster mother and the toddler she was striking with a belt. The third home was pilfering checks from children who were no longer residing there. When Trevor documented it, they accused him of the theft, and each time he protected someone, he became the antagonist. He mentioned the current family was expelling him on Monday, making this his 4th failure. I asked why he continued to protect people when it devastated his life. He gazed at me with vacant eyes, stating that if he did not intervene, he would become precisely what they claimed, just another monster. I asserted we had to inform people of the truth, but Trevor shook his head, saying, "No one listens to foster children." Trevor's hands were quivering as he prepared to depart, but I observed it was not from the cold. It was from finally disclosing the truth to someone after years of silence. The basketball bounced once more on the empty court before rolling away into the gloom. I seized his arm, desperate to prevent him from leaving. Trevor recoiled sharply, his entire physique tensing at the contact. The terror that flickered across his countenance revealed more about his past than any case file ever could. He stepped back, creating space between us. "You need to stay away from me. Becoming involved will ruin your college prospects, your family relationships." His eyes held mine with an intensity that made my stomach churn. "I know your father works for the school district. I have done my research." The realization struck me like icy water. Trevor had not merely been surviving day to day. He had been shielding me from the repercussions of assisting him. His phone vibrated, cutting through the tension. Trevor glanced at the screen, and his shoulders slumped. He answered, and I could hear Miss Chin's weary voice through the speaker. She mentioned something about this being her 6th placement failure this month. The burden of the flawed system weighed heavily on both of us. "Let me help," I blurted out. "You could stay at my house, just until we figure something out." Trevor's laughter was bitter. "Your mother would summon the authorities before I even crossed the threshold." His hands clenched and unclenched, and I witnessed genuine panic flash across his face at the mention of police. As we stood there debating, my phone illuminated with notifications. Anton had rushed home to his parents, alleging the harassment was ongoing. His parents were already on the phone with Principal Hayes, escalating the situation. Trevor saw the messages on my screen and immediately retrieved his own phone. He began frantically deleting content. Not just videos of foster siblings he had protected, but search histories, saved articles, everything. I caught glimpses of his deleted searches, how to disappear at 18, and emancipation requirements. My heart sank. Trevor had been planning to flee. The pressure was mounting. Anton's parents were not merely complaining. They were demanding immediate action regarding the supposed restraining order violation. Trevor's placement hung by a thread, and now the administration had fresh ammunition. Headlights swept across the basketball court. My mother's car pulled up, and she emerged with that expression that signaled an impending lecture. But when she truly saw Trevor's face, she hesitated. Something in his genuine distress made her maternal instincts contend with her preconceived notions. "Get in the car," she commanded me. But her voice lacked its usual sharpness. Trevor astonished everyone, including himself. "Mrs. Johnson, could I speak with you for just a moment?" My mother's refusal died on her lips. Perhaps it was his respectful tone, so unlike what she had anticipated. Perhaps it was the way he stood there, clearly terrified, but attempting anyway. She granted him 5 minutes. Trevor pulled something up on his phone, deleted texts from the 8-year-old girl he protected, but then he disclosed something that chilled me to the bone. The girl was in therapy now, and her current foster family attributed her behavioral issues to Trevor. His protection had saved her from immediate harm, but left lasting psychological scars. The sound of another car interrupted us. Mrs. Henderson stepped out, all feigned smiles and concern. She had come to apologize for the misunderstanding, but I could discern her true objective, assessing how much Trevor had disclosed, controlling the narrative. The following morning at school, the repercussions became evident. My college counselor discreetly pulled me aside, mentioning that the administration had advised her to monitor my association with problematic students for future reference letters. The threat was subtle, yet unmistakable. During lunch, Trevor located me in the hallway. His face displayed a blend of hope and desperation as he revealed he had been accepted into a community college program. But if he were relocated to a different district, he would forfeit the opportunity. The stakes were no longer solely about his current placement. They concerned his entire future. I decided to contact Sarah, the girl whose social media had become private after mentioning Trevor. What I uncovered sickened me. Her account was not private by choice. She had been receiving harassment from individuals who believed she was fabricating stories about her foster father. The system that should have safeguarded her was now assailing her for speaking out. In the library that afternoon, I overheard Miss Chan on a phone call. She was discussing Trevor's case with another caseworker, and the phrases "too complex" and "residential facility" froze my blood. They were not merely considering transferring him to another foster home. They were contemplating institutionalizing him. Anton's parents had their meeting with Principal Hayes, armed with evidence of Trevor's supposed obsessive conduct. They cited Anton's reports of feeling observed and pursued, portraying Trevor as a dangerous stalker rather than someone who had intervened to assist me. I watched Trevor during study hall, once again helping Marcus with his chemistry homework. When Marcus touched Trevor's shoulder to thank him, Trevor flinched violently. The trauma response was automatic, ingrained from years of mistreatment. Physical contact was a trigger he could not control. Later, Marcus approached me privately. What he recounted complicated everything. Yes, Trevor had aided him with his tormentors, but the manner in which Trevor had confronted them had been so aggressive, so intense, that Marcus had also been afraid of Trevor. The protection came with a cost. When I sat with Trevor at lunch the next day, other students suddenly wished to join us. But their interest was not solidarity. It was voyeurism. They desired front-row seats to this psycho-foster kid drama. Their feigned support felt worse than overt hostility. Anton cornered me after school, but instead of his usual threats, he appeared genuinely perplexed. Why are you defending someone who researched my entire family? He knows where my father works, where my little sister attends school. That is not normal. The pieces were beginning to form a picture I did not wish to see. Trevor's protection stemmed from a place of trauma, but his methods were not always proportionate to the threat. Mrs. Patterson intercepted me in the parking lot, but she was not gossiping this time. She appeared genuinely distressed. I have been receiving calls from other parents. They wish to know why I am not protecting the children from that boy. They are threatening to approach the school board about me. The pressure was mounting from every direction, and Thursday's deadline loomed like a storm cloud. Trevor's future, my future, and the truth about what truly transpired in his past were all hanging in the balance. My mother contacted my college admissions counselor the following morning, expressing reservations about my judgment and decision-making abilities. I discovered this when the counselor summoned me to her office during third period, posing pointed questions about my recent associations and whether I comprehended how my choices might reflect on my application. The manipulation was subtle but effective. My mother had weaponized my future against me. I recognized the tactic immediately. My mother had acquired these techniques from her own controlling mother, perpetuating generational patterns of emotional manipulation. But recognizing the pattern did not diminish the pain or reduce its efficacy. My aspirations of attending my preferred college were now held hostage to my willingness to abandon Trevor. Ms. Chun arrived at school that afternoon, but her usual professional demeanor was strained. She pulled me aside near the library, glancing around nervously before speaking. Her supervisors were pressuring her about Trevor's case, suggesting a transfer to a group home facility with more restrictions. The implication was clear. Assisting Trevor might result in him being confined in an institution rather than placed with a family. Marcus's parents arrived at school the following day, permanently withdrawing him from classes. I observed from the hallway as they marched him past Trevor's locker. Marcus's face contorted with guilt and frustration. Despite Marcus's protest that Trevor had never harmed him, his parents refused to allow him to associate with someone they deemed dangerous. Even positive witnesses were being systematically silenced. I began recording conversations with adults on my phone, hoping to document the manipulation and bias. But I quickly discovered that several people I trusted were sharing my private conversations with other parents. The guidance counselor's confidential discussion about my concerns had reached Mrs. Patterson within hours. The betrayal stung, but it taught me to be more cautious about whom I confided in. My request for a school board meeting to discuss Trevor's situation was denied due to confidentiality concerns. I meticulously documented the denial, noting which officials had made the decision and their stated reasons. The paper trail might prove useful later, even if it could not immediately aid Trevor. Mrs. Kim, the librarian who had always been kind to Trevor, admitted she desired to help, but feared for her employment. She had witnessed what occurred to staff members who opposed the administration's decisions regarding problematic students. The institutional pressure fostered a culture of silence where even well-intentioned adults were afraid to speak up. While researching Trevor's case history with Ms. Chin's reluctant assistance, I made a shocking discovery. Trevor's first foster father, the one who had been arrested for abusing children, shared the same surname as Anton's family. The connection explained Anton's parents' extreme reaction. They were desperate to distance themselves from their family's shameful secret. Sarah finally responded to my messages, but her reply was heartbreaking. Her therapist had advised her not to discuss Trevor because talking about that period triggered severe PTSD episodes. Even though Trevor had saved her, the violence she had witnessed during his protection had left lasting psychological scars. When Anton harassed me in the hallway the next day, I remained composed and documented everything. Other students noticed my calm response, but some interpreted it as evidence that Trevor had brainwashed me. The narrative was shifting. I was no longer merely defending him. I was supposedly under his manipulative influence. Ms. Chun revealed devastating news during a hushed conversation after school. The court had accelerated Trevor's placement review to Thursday instead of Friday. Mrs. Henderson had filed an official complaint claiming Trevor had threatened her, though she provided no specifics. The timeline was accelerating, leaving less time to find a resolution. Mr. Kim, one of the few teachers who treated Trevor fairly, privately showed me a folder where he had been documenting Trevor's positive behavior. But when I asked him to officially speak up, he revealed he was on probation for a previous incident where he defended a student against administrative overreach. Even teachers who wished to help were constrained by their own vulnerabilities. I managed to record Mrs. Henderson during a conversation with another parent outside the grocery store. Her facade completely crumbled as she complained about Trevor creeping out her biological children. She chuckled while describing his distress at being removed from yet another home. The recording captured her true sentiments. She could not wait to be rid of him. Trevor declined my offers to help locate a new placement. During a tense conversation behind the gym, he revealed his intention to run away when he turned 18 in 3 months. He would rather live on the streets than continue being shuffled between homes that did not want him. The system had broken him down to the point where homelessness seemed preferable to another rejection. As some students began questioning Trevor's culpability, Mrs. Henderson intensified her campaign. She disseminated a new rumor that Trevor had been grooming younger students like Marcus to defend him. The accusation was malicious and baseless, but it effectively silenced students who might have spoken in his favor. My research unveiled a disturbing pattern. Trevor's removal dates from previous homes coincided with investigations into his foster families. But I also discovered that his protective actions had sometimes unnecessarily escalated situations. In one instance, he had fractured a man's arm when a firm push might have sufficed. His trauma had created a hair-trigger response to perceived threats. Mrs. Henderson's influence extended far beyond our neighborhood. She was connected to the local foster care network through her volunteer work, and she had been disseminating Trevor's story to other potential placements. She was systematically destroying any chance he had of finding a family willing to take him. Ms. Chen finally shared more specifics about the incident with Anton's uncle. The man had been apprehended, validating Trevor's protective instincts. But Trevor's intervention had resulted in the man being hospitalized with severe injuries. Multiple children who witnessed the violence were traumatized by what they had seen. Trevor's protection had come at a terrible cost. Jessica, a girl from my AP history class, chose to sit with Trevor and me at lunch despite her mother's explicit warnings. Her mother had threatened to withdraw funding for Jessica's college education if she associated with that violent boy. Jessica's defiance demonstrated true bravery. She was risking her entire future to do what she believed was right. The consequences swiftly followed. Jessica faced a student council censure vote after several parents complained to the administration about her poor judgment. The message was unambiguous. Supporting Trevor meant sacrificing your own opportunities and reputation. I found myself grappling with the moral intricacy of Trevor's situation. His protection of vulnerable children was commendable, even heroic, but his methods were sometimes extreme, causing additional trauma to those he attempted to assist. The black and white narrative I had initially embraced was dissolving into uncomfortable shades of gray. During a confrontation with Mrs. Patterson in the school parking lot, I presented facts about Trevor's academic achievements and lack of disciplinary issues at our school, but she revealed she had been contacted by parents from Trevor's previous schools, all sharing similar concerns about his escalation patterns. The pattern extended far beyond our current predicament. Ms. Chun arranged a meeting with my mother, finally sharing more details about Trevor's history with his consent. The file contained troubling incidents where Trevor's protective instincts had led to disproportionate responses. A foster father who slapped a child ended up with a shattered jaw. A woman who roughly grabbed a toddler found herself thrown into a wall hard enough to leave a hole in the drywall. Some foster parents in the network began questioning Mrs. Henderson's version of events, but others became more convinced of Trevor's danger after hearing about his escalation patterns. The community was dividing into factions, but neither side possessed the complete picture. Mr. Kim and his wife, also a teacher, vouched for Trevor's current behavior at school. They testified that he had never displayed aggression towards students or staff, but they acknowledged they could not speak to his past actions or explain his methods when protecting others. Even his strongest allies could not defend everything. My mother agreed to meet with Miss Chin privately, but she demanded complete transparency about Trevor's history. She wished to know about every incident, every removal, every complaint. Her protective instincts as a mother were at odds with her growing empathy for a damaged child. Anton finally admitted to me that he had lied about the timeline of Trevor's supposed stalking. But he also revealed that Trevor's intensity during their confrontation had genuinely frightened him. The fear in Trevor's eyes, the way his entire body had tensed for violence, it was not entirely an act. Anton's fear had not been completely fabricated. My credibility at school was partially restored as the truth about Anton's falsehoods emerged, but some classmates now questioned whether I fully understood what I was defending. They wondered if I was naive about the potential danger Trevor represented, even if his intentions were benevolent. Mrs. Henderson's options were diminishing as more people learned about her treatment of Trevor, but she revealed she had been in contact with all of Trevor's previous placements, gathering concerning information about his behavioral patterns. She was constructing a comprehensive case against him. Sarah courageously shared her story with Ms. Chun, confirming that Trevor had protected her from abuse, but she also revealed the lasting impact of witnessing his violence. She was still in therapy years later, grappling with nightmares about the sound of breaking bones and her foster father's screams. Even successful protection had created lasting trauma. I found myself in the challenging position of defending Trevor while acknowledging that his methods sometimes went too far. During a heated discussion with classmates, I had to concede that while his protective instincts were admirable, he required assistance in learning appropriate responses to threats. Marcus, Jessica, and a few other students formed a support group for Trevor, but it quickly fractured. Some believed his past actions were entirely justified given the circumstances. Others felt that violence, even protective violence, was never acceptable to that degree. The disagreement mirrored the broader community's struggle to categorize Trevor. Mrs. Henderson's attempts to portray Trevor as manipulative gained traction when she revealed he had been researching everyone's backgrounds online. He knew which teachers had financial difficulties, which students had divorced parents, which administrators had questionable pasts. His research was extensive and unsettling, even if he claimed it was for protection. My mother observed Trevor helping an injured student who had fallen during PE. His response was immediate and competent. He knew precisely how to stabilize the injury and keep the student calm. But she also noticed his hypervigilance, the way he aggressively scanned the environment for additional threats. His protective instincts were both admirable and disquieting. My reputation at school became increasingly intricate. Some viewed me as courageously defending an innocent victim of the system. Others perceived me as naively defending someone dangerous. The truth, as I was learning, lay somewhere in between. Ms. Chun presented documented evidence of Trevor's protective pattern to the school administration. She included the arrest record of his first foster father and testimonies from children he had protected. But the administrators focused primarily on the concerning escalation rather than the protection itself. They were more concerned about liability than justice. Thursday's deadline approached with terrifying speed. Trevor revealed he had already packed his few possessions and planned to run away Tuesday night. He would rather vanish than face another institutional placement. I was compelled to choose between helping him escape or persuading him to remain and combat a system that seemed designed to destroy him. The truth about Mrs. Henderson's motivations finally surfaced. She was not merely accepting the monthly payments for fostering Trevor. She was building a portfolio to establish herself as an authority on managing challenging foster children. She intended to launch a consulting business, speaking at conferences about handling aggressive youth. Trevor's suffering was her potential gain. I realized that advocating for Trevor was the right course of action, but it was systematically jeopardizing my own future. My college prospects were harmed, my family relationships were strained, and my reputation was in tatters. The cost of doing what was right was higher than I had ever imagined. Instead of reacting emotionally to each new crisis, I began presenting Trevor's case systematically. I acknowledged the troubling patterns in his past while emphasizing his need for appropriate support rather than punishment. The candor about his imperfections made the defense more credible than blind allegiance would have been. Some teachers and students began to accept this nuanced perspective of Trevor. They understood he was not simply a villain or a hero, but a traumatized young man who required assistance in managing his protective instincts. Others became more apprehensive about his escalation patterns, concerned about what might provoke his aggression. The truth that emerged was intricate and unsettling. Trevor had consistently protected vulnerable individuals, but his methods were sometimes disproportionate to the threat. He required therapeutic intervention to learn appropriate responses, not institutional punishment or abandonment. Ms. Chin finally located a potential placement with the Millers, a family experienced in fostering children with trauma, but they wished to meet Trevor first and review his complete file, including all concerning incidents. The solution demanded complete honesty about his past and his struggles. Mrs. Henderson made a final desperate attempt to undermine the placement. She threatened to disclose additional incidents that Trevor had supposedly concealed from his file. Her claims grew more elaborate and less believable, but she still held sway within the foster care network. The threat began to unravel when Miss Chun and I compared Mrs. Henderson's claims to official records. She had been exaggerating incidents, and in some cases completely fabricating events. Her determination to build her expert credentials had led her to ruin a child's life for professional advancement. Other foster parents in the network discovered Mrs. Henderson's manipulation when we presented evidence of her falsehoods. She had been documenting everything about Trevor, not for his safety or improvement, but for her planned consulting business. Every moment of his pain had been potential material for her presentations on managing difficult foster children. Trevor's relationships with those of us who supported him grew stronger, but more complex. We all understood his capacity for protective violence and the trauma that fueled it. Supporting him meant accepting both his heroic instincts and his dangerous methods. My mother's transformation was remarkable, yet measured. She became an advocate for Trevor, but she established clear boundaries about what behaviors she would tolerate. Support came with non-negotiable conditions. He had to commit to therapy and learning appropriate responses to threats. Her support was not unconditional, but it was genuine. The Miller family met with Trevor in a neutral location. They were experienced enough to recognize both his protective nature and his trauma responses. They posed direct questions about his past actions and did not recoil from his honest answers. Their years of working with traumatized children had prepared them for complexity. The breakthrough occurred when Trevor himself acknowledged that his protective instincts sometimes went too far. He admitted needing help learning proportionate responses to threats. His self-awareness and willingness to change became his strongest argument for placement rather than institutionalization. The truth about Trevor's complex situation could not have emerged at a worse time. Mrs. Henderson's consulting business plans had already reached several foster care agencies, and she had scheduled her first speaking engagement about managing violent foster children for the following week. Her profit motive became undeniable when I discovered she had been photographing Trevor's belongings and documenting his daily routines for her presentation materials. The Miller family's willingness to meet Trevor created immediate backlash. Anton's parents escalated their campaign by contacting every school board member individually, armed with selective excerpts from Trevor's case file. They emphasized the hospitalized foster father while admitting that the man had been arrested for child abuse. Their family connection to that first placement drove them to desperate measures. Tuesday morning brought a devastating setback. The Miller family temporarily withdrew their offer after receiving an anonymous package containing exaggerated accounts of Trevor's past incidents. The timing was not coincidental. Mrs. Henderson had been diligently networking with her foster parent connections all weekend. Ms. Chin faced increasing pressure from her supervisor about her over-involvement in Trevor's case. During a tense meeting I witnessed through the office window, her supervisor gestured emphatically while Missy Chin's shoulders sagged. She emerged with strict instructions to limit her advocacy and focus on finding any placement regardless of suitability. Jessica's parents forbade her from any contact with our support group after learning about Trevor's escalation patterns. They arrived at school demanding she be removed from any classes we shared. Jessica's defiance crumbled under the threat of losing her college funding, and she avoided eye contact when passing me in the hallway. The mediation meeting scheduled for Wednesday afternoon would determine Trevor's fate. All parties would convene: the Miller family, Miss Chin's supervisor, school officials, Anton's parents, and Mrs. Henderson. The prospect of everyone in one room, unable to conceal themselves behind rumors and assumptions, created both hope and dread. Trevor's behavior shifted dramatically as the meeting approached. His usual careful composure gave way to barely contained anxiety. During chemistry class, his hands trembled so severely he could not complete the lab experiment. When the teacher offered assistance, Trevor's flinch was so pronounced that nearby students recoiled. I spent Tuesday night compiling every piece of documentation I had gathered: recordings, screenshots, witness statements, and official records. The evidence painted a complex picture that neither fully vindicated nor condemned Trevor. His protective actions were undeniable, but so were the traumatic consequences for those who witnessed his interventions. Wednesday morning arrived with unexpected support. Mr. Kim and 3 other teachers submitted written statements about Trevor's positive behavior at school. They could not defend his past, but could attest to his current conduct. Their willingness to risk administrative displeasure demonstrated that some adults still valued truth over convenience. Anton's parents arrived at the mediation meeting 40 minutes early, commandeering the conference room to arrange their materials. They had prepared a presentation complete with printed slides highlighting every concerning incident from Trevor's past. Their determination to prevent the placement revealed their terror about their family's secret becoming public knowledge. Mrs. Henderson entered with a folder thick with documentation for her consulting business. She had already titled it, "Managing High-Risk Foster Placements, a Case Study." Every page represented another way she had commodified Trevor's trauma for professional gain. The Miller family arrived looking apprehensive, but not intimidated. Their experience with traumatized children showed in their calm demeanor and the thoughtful questions they had prepared. They had clearly conducted their own research beyond the inflammatory package they had received. Ms. Chin's supervisor, a woman named Catherine, who had never met Trevor personally, would moderate the meeting. Her primary concern appeared to be liability and procedure rather than Trevor's well-being. She arranged the seating to keep Trevor separated from Anton's parents, treating him like a potential threat, even in this controlled environment. Trevor entered last, and his transformation was striking. Instead of his usual defensive posture, he sat upright and made eye contact with everyone present. His hands still trembled, but he had clearly made a decision about how to handle this crucial moment. The meeting commenced with Anton's parents presenting their case. They focused exclusively on Trevor's pattern of escalation and the potential danger to other students. When they mentioned their family connection to Trevor's first placement, Anton's father's face flushed as he quickly moved past that detail. Mrs. Henderson followed with her presentation about the challenges of managing Trevor's placement. She spoke as if she were already at her consulting conference, using Trevor as a case study while he sat right there. Her clinical detachment, while discussing his trauma, revealed her complete disconnect from his humanity. When Catherine asked Trevor to respond, he did something unexpected. Instead of defending or denying, he acknowledged the validity of their concerns. He admitted that his protective instincts had sometimes led to disproportionate responses. He described the panic that overwhelmed him when he saw vulnerable children in danger, how his own trauma created a need to intervene that sometimes went too far. The room fell silent as Trevor continued. He explained that he understood why his methods frightened people, why witnesses to his protection were traumatized even when he had helped them. He did not minimize or excuse his actions, but contextualized them within his own history of abuse and his desperate need to prevent others from experiencing what he had. The Miller family posed direct questions about specific incidents. Trevor answered honestly, including details that made him appear worse rather than better. When they inquired about the foster father he had hospitalized, Trevor described the sound the man's arm made when it broke, acknowledging that he had continued attacking even after the immediate threat was neutralized. Ms. Chun presented the documentation she had compiled about Trevor's protective pattern, but she also included something new, a treatment plan developed with a trauma specialist who had reviewed Trevor's case. The plan outlined specific therapeutic interventions to help him develop proportionate responses to perceived threats. Anton's parents grew increasingly agitated as the meeting progressed. Their carefully constructed narrative about Trevor as simply dangerous was complicated by evidence of his protective motivations. When Anton's father mentioned their family's reputation in the community, his wife touched his arm in warning, but the damage was done. Their self-interest was becoming apparent. The discussion turned to practical considerations. If the Millers accepted Trevor, he would need to commit to intensive therapy, regular check-ins with a behavioral specialist, and strict protocols for handling situations where he felt protective instincts arising. The structure was not punishment, but support for learning healthier responses. Trevor accepted every condition without hesitation. His readiness to acknowledge his need for assistance and submit to oversight impressed the Millers. They had fostered enough traumatized children to recognize the distinction between manipulation and genuine self-awareness. Mrs. Henderson made a final attempt to disrupt the placement by suggesting Trevor had concealed additional incidents. But when pressed for specifics, she could only reference vague concerns from previous placements. Her credibility crumbled as it became clear she had been inflating her expertise at Trevor's expense. The moment of decision arrived when the Miller family requested a private discussion with Trevor. Catherine initially objected, citing safety concerns, but Mr. Miller's quiet insistence that they had fostered children with far more violent histories settled the matter. They departed for a smaller conference room while the rest of us waited in tense silence. During their absence, Anton's mother confronted me in the hallway. Her polished exterior cracked as she demanded to know why I was destroying their family's reputation for someone like him. The desperation in her voice revealed how much their family's secret about the arrested uncle haunted them. 20 minutes later, the Millers returned with Trevor. Their expressions were serious, but not rejecting. Mrs. Miller announced they would accept the placement with all discussed conditions. Trevor's relief was so profound that his knees briefly buckled before he steadied himself on a chair. Catherine documented the decision with bureaucratic efficiency, outlining timelines and requirements. Trevor would transition to the Miller home by Friday, begin therapy the following week, and have daily check-ins for the first month. The structure was intensive, but focused on rehabilitation rather than punishment. Anton's parents departed immediately, their threat about contacting community leaders deflated by the official decision. Their influence had limits when faced with experienced foster parents who comprehended trauma's complexity. Their family secret would remain buried, but at the cost of their campaign against Trevor. Mrs. Henderson's departure was equally swift. Her aspirations of launching a consulting career using Trevor's case had collapsed. The Millers made it clear they would not tolerate any exploitation of their foster children for professional gain. Her folder of documentation became worthless without Trevor as her ongoing case study. Thursday morning brought unexpected difficulties. Several students who had supported the false narrative about Trevor confronted me, demanding to know why I had defended someone who admitted to violence. They could not grasp the distinction between protective instincts and random aggression, between trauma responses and intentional harm. Trevor spent his last day at the Hendersons packing his few possessions. When I stopped by after school, I found him carefully folding the same garments he had arrived with in that refused sack. Mrs. Henderson had already removed all traces of his presence from the common areas, eager to erase any evidence he had lived there. The transition to the Miller home on Friday proceeded smoothly. They had prepared a room that balanced welcoming warmth with the structure Trevor required. Clear household regulations were posted, but so were resources for managing anxiety and trauma responses. Their experience was evident in every thoughtful detail. Trevor's first therapy appointment was scheduled for Monday. The specialist, Ms. Chun had located, focused on trauma-informed treatment for adolescents with protective aggression patterns. The approach would not minimize Trevor's protective instincts, but would teach him proportionate responses. At school, the reaction to Trevor's placement was mixed. Some students remained convinced he was dangerous despite the nuanced truth that had emerged. Others began to comprehend the complexity of trauma and protection. The simplistic narrative of the violent foster kid had shattered, replaced by uncomfortable questions about how the system fails vulnerable children. My relationship with my mother required careful reconstruction. Her initial prejudice had given way to understanding, but the manipulative tactics she had employed left scars. We began family counseling to address the generational patterns that had led her to weaponize my future against my moral choices. The foster care network slowly absorbed the truth about Mrs. Henderson's exploitation. Several agencies reviewed their policies regarding foster parents using children's cases for professional development. Trevor's situation had exposed a vulnerability in the system where children's trauma could be commodified by those presumed to protect them. 3 weeks into his placement with the Millers, Trevor showed measurable progress. The therapeutic interventions helped him recognize the physical indicators of escalating protective instincts. He learned grounding techniques to manage the panic that drove his disproportionate responses. The work was arduous, requiring him to revisit traumatic memories while developing new coping mechanisms. The school administration quietly revised their approach to foster students after Trevor's case exposed their bias. No formal apology was issued, but new protocols emphasized support over suspicion. The change was incremental, but meaningful for future foster children entering the school. Ms. Chun received a formal reprimand for her excessive involvement, but wore it as a mark of distinction. She had fought for a child when the system desired easy solutions. Her supervisor, Catherine, began including her in more complex case consultations, recognizing that passionate advocacy had its place alongside bureaucratic efficiency. Jessica gradually rebuilt her relationship with our support group. Her parents' financial threats had forced her temporary withdrawal, but she found ways to demonstrate solidarity that did not jeopardize her future. She tutored Trevor in history, helping him catch up on missed assignments while maintaining the boundaries her parents required. The community's judgment remained divided. Some people clung to their initial assessment of Trevor as dangerous, unable to accept the nuanced reality. Others recognized that his story exposed uncomfortable truths about how quickly we judge and abandon vulnerable children. The conversation shifted from simple categories of good and bad to complex discussions about trauma, protection, and proportionate response. Trevor's progress in therapy was not linear. Some days, his protective instincts overwhelmed his new coping strategies. During one incident, he intervened when a younger student was being bullied, but he managed to de-escalate using words rather than physical force. The victory was small, but significant, proof that change was feasible with proper support. The Millers proved to be precisely what Trevor needed. Their experience with traumatized children meant they recognized both progress and setbacks as part of healing. They celebrated his academic achievements while maintaining the structure that helped him feel secure. Their biological children, already accustomed to foster siblings with complex histories, welcomed Trevor with cautious warmth. 6 weeks after the placement, Trevor achieved a milestone. He successfully navigated a situation where his protective instincts were triggered without any physical intervention. A child at the grocery store was being roughly handled by an adult, and Trevor's body tensed for action. Instead, he utilized his grounding techniques, assessed the situation calmly, and alerted store security. The child received assistance without Trevor risking disproportionate violence. My college prospects slowly recovered. The counselor who questioned my judgment acknowledged that my advocacy for Trevor demonstrated moral fortitude. My application essays became stronger for having grappled with complex ethical questions rather than maintaining comfortable ignorance. The experience had cost me, but also deepened my understanding of justice and compassion. Anton eventually admitted to me that his family's apprehension had driven their campaign against Trevor. The shame of their connection to Trevor's first abusive placement had made them desperate to distance themselves. His apology was awkward but genuine, recognizing that their self-preservation had nearly destroyed Trevor's chance at stability. The ripple effects of Trevor's case extended beyond our immediate community. Ms. Chun shared the successful treatment approach with other caseworkers dealing with similar situations. The model of therapeutic intervention rather than institutional punishment offered hope for other traumatized children whose protective instincts had led to aggressive responses. Trevor's relationship with physical contact remained intricate. The Millers worked with his therapist to develop a gradual exposure plan, helping him differentiate between safe touch and threats. Progress was measured in small victories, accepting a handshake without flinching, sitting closer to others without panic, eventually even accepting a careful embrace from Mrs. Miller. The truth that emerged from Trevor's story was neither simple vindication nor condemnation. He was a traumatized young man whose protective instincts had saved children but also caused harm. His violence stemmed from a place of desperate compassion, but that did not erase its impact on those who witnessed it. The solution was not to abandon or institutionalize him, but to provide the therapeutic support needed to channel his protective nature appropriately. As the school year concluded, Trevor's transformation was remarkable but realistic. He still struggled with trauma responses, and likely always would. But he had learned to recognize his triggers, employ coping strategies, and seek help when overwhelmed. His grades improved with stability, and he maintained his acceptance to the community college program. The Millers committed to supporting him through the transition to adulthood, recognizing that healing from trauma was a long-term process. Most importantly, Trevor's case had compelled our community to confront its hasty judgments and facile categorizations. We had learned that protecting vulnerable children sometimes meant accepting complex truths about trauma and recovery. The system had functioned not through punishment or abandonment, but through patient understanding and structured support. Trevor's future remained uncertain, but hopeful. A young man learning to protect others without destroying himself in the process.